Change is part of life, and making the right change can make all the difference to us and our planet. Hello and welcome, I'm Sadhika Tiwari and you're watching Eco India. The key to meaningful changes isn't just about big ideas, it is also about how we put those ideas into practice. It can be challenging, but it can also be game-changing. Something that really needs to change is plastic pollution. India is one of the biggest polluters of single-use plastic in the world, according to a study from the UK. For years in India, informal waste pickers have been sorting, recycling and reselling plastic waste. But a majority of them has been excluded from the recent waste management policies and have no social security nets. Can big corporate players change this?
India's burgeoning urban population is driving up consumption. The side effects of that are visible across big cities like Mumbai. It's left to waste pickers like Kavita Nanavare to manually sift through the trash in search of recyclable material.
The bottles sell at the highest price at 20 rupees per kilo. The white containers sell at the same price as the plastic bottles. The black plastic containers earn us just 6 rupees a kilo.
India is one of the largest plastic polluters in the world, generating nearly 10 million tons of plastic waste each year. India's Central Pollution Control Board show that just 13% of this is recycled, even though 1.5 million people work as waste pickers across the country.
Today, a lot more products are packaged in plastics. Moreover, a lot more products are packaged in materials, plastic materials, which are non-recyclable in nature. They are problematic in nature, which means that even if they get collected, there is very less likelihood that it will end up in a recycling facility.
Not far from Mumbai, in Pune, waste pickers working with the cooperative Swachh collect all kinds of plastic, including multi-layered plastic. They are engaged by the Pune Municipal Corporation to fetch the trash from people's homes, shops, etc. However, waste segregation is still far from perfect.
We often get mixed garbage, and that's a big challenge. People put wet and dry stuff in the same bag. Diapers, sanitary pads, and condoms all dumped together. We have to segregate all this by hand, and that's really tedious. We have asked people to put their wet waste in a separate bag many times, but not everyone listens. That causes a lot of problems.
Unsegregated plastic waste cannot be recycled, but Swachh members make the effort to separate and clean the multi-layered as well as the single-layered plastic. This is a result of Swachh's collaboration with ITC Limited, which is helping incentivize waste pickers to recycle Pune's multi-layered plastic waste. The company produces both plastic and sustainable packaging. We asked ITC for more information about its plastic use and its partnership with Swachh, but we didn't hear back. Swachh project manager Lubna Anantakrishnan says ITC support has made the project here in Pune possible.
Even where there is a system to do it, is prohibitively expensive. This is because the cost of buying, collecting, transporting, aggregating, getting MLP to the recycler and then recycling it is very high, much higher than the value you get for the recycled product. That is where ITC comes in. And ITC pays what is called the viability gap to make this operation viable.
Sarika Gaikwar bundles up what she can find on her rounds in Pune and brings them to a collection point. She now gets paid enough for each kilo of multi-layered plastic to be motivated to process it.
Often with MLP, no scrap dealer is willing to take it because it is very difficult to sell in the recycling market. It is very difficult to recycle. Now at Swachh, we get paid more for MLP and that makes a big difference to our livelihood.
Swachh now collects some 1,200 metric tons of multi-layered plastic every year and brings it here to the recycling factory. A long series of conveyor belts, shredders, sorters, and extractors turn the MLP into material that can be reused. The end product can then be made into something new.
In one of our studies back in 2021, we found that it is actually the informal space that feeds the formal recycling value chain. The formal recycling value chain does not have the bandwidth to collect, to process, does not have the expertise in terms of identifying different kinds of items, and falls back on the expertise and the strength and the bandwidth of the informal sector in order to have access to these materials.
Back in Mumbai, the head of the local waste pickers union says their workers need better facilities and incentives too.
We are at the bottom of the heap. There is an entire industry of recycling operating over and above us, making a lot of money. But we don't get noticed at all for our work. If we are not there to pick up every piece of plastic, imagine what would happen.
The Indian government's plastic waste management regulations ignore the role of waste pickers. Experts say the only way to make enhanced producer responsibility a reality is by companies recognizing and paying for their work.
Companies today are only paying 10% of the actual cost that is required for recycling problematic fractions like multi-layer packaging. The remaining 9 rupees out of this 10 rupee cost is externalized, which means that either end consumers are paying or the local governments are paying, or it is the state government and the national government that is paying the cost for management of this plastic.
But recycling initiatives like this one here in Pune are expensive and difficult to scale up nationally. While this program is helping waste pickers to make a better living, the only sustainable long-term solution is probably to cut down plastic use in the first place.
Protecting our fragile ecosystems is a vital job, but it's not very easy. Worldwide, wildlife rangers risk their lives to protect plant and animal species. Down south, in a biosphere reserve in Tamil Nadu, anti-poaching guards too confront a lot of challenges. But what motivates and drives them to do this job? Join us as we explore their world.
The Nilgiri tahar feels at home here. The species has lived in the region for 1.5 million years. It was almost on the point of dying out due to poaching, but numbers have bounced back a little. This is partly thanks to the work of these rangers, who are there to safeguard the creatures. We are in the north of Tamil Nadu. The Nilgiri's Biosphere Reserve lies between the western and eastern Ghats, and Mukurthi National Park is located within it.
National Park is a forest reserve. No one can enter this reserve without our permission. If an individual person attempts to come inside to poach deer or even to steal honey from the wild bees, we are here to protect the forest from them.
People here are proud of the park's biodiversity. Tigers, elephants, bisons, and leopards also live here. That is a big draw for poachers. Every morning, the anti-poaching watchers head off into the forest in small groups. It would be too dangerous to go alone.
We drive on the motorbike as long as the road is intact and check if any animals have been killed. And if there is any trace of illegal activities like poaching or land grabbing, or the signs of any movement of people.
The men also sometimes have to work day and night, especially when it's hot and dry. They need to keep a lookout for signs of fire so they can act swiftly. Periods of heavy rainfall are also difficult because it makes crossing the rough terrain trickier.
Compared to other forests, it is very difficult to find your way back here. Getting lost is easy. Once we got stuck in a heavy downpour, we were trapped. We were completely surrounded by water.
The Mukurthi National Park covers an area of more than 80 square kilometers. The anti-poaching watchers work together with forest officers. They need backup.
In this anti-poaching activity, the contribution of forest officers is to give physical and moral support and help with intelligence gathering. We teach them how to make knots, river crossings, bridges, rock climbing, how to get out of the helicopters. So we teach them all kind of safety measures. In this way, we work together and ensure the forest is protected.
The work out here is more than a job. The men sometimes have to work to the point of physical exhaustion. The less busy periods give them a chance to recharge their batteries. And nature is benefiting. In reserves like these, animal species can recover a little. Creatures that have lost their habitats elsewhere or that have been forced to the point of extinction in the past. Here, they can just live their lives.
Did you ever need to worry about not having enough water? Delhi, with its harsh weather conditions and high levels of pollution, is no stranger to water crises. While access to clean water remains a recurrent problem, many wastewater treatment plants are either underutilized or just dysfunctional. Could recycling more water be the solution to this problem?
60% of the large centralized treatment plants in India's cities are not properly functional. They're old, poorly maintained, and often there is a shortage of trained staff. Yet, the potential of wastewater treatment is huge.
Even if we are able to recycle and reuse 30-40% of water, it means that much more water available for domestic use, the critical sector, okay, which is important for health and hygiene.
With the help of sensors and data streams, a number of startups are aiming to tap the potential of wastewater treatment. For women in the Sangam Vihar area, accessing clean water is a daily struggle. With over 1 million inhabitants, it's Asia's largest unauthorized colony. Located only 20 kilometers from the Indian Parliament, the area lies partly beyond the city's water supply network. The state borewells are operational only once a month. The groundwater level is simply too low. The only option for residents is to get water from tankers. That's expensive and often not enough. The situation is desperate.
Borewell water can't be used for cooking. It has high level of salts. The water is so dirty that our water filters get clogged up.
Water is scarce throughout Delhi. The Indian capital can only meet around 75% of its water needs. And moreover, water is distributed unfairly. In some areas, there is more than enough. In others, there is almost nothing. Up to 30% of clean water is lost through leaks or is spilled and wasted.
There's no reason why Delhi cannot meet its water supply and provide water to everyone with its current supply levels.
One way to do that is with improved wastewater treatment. Less than half of Delhi's wastewater is recycled, and only 18% of the water treated actually gets used. The pipes of the 35 centralized treatment plants are dilapidated, and a lot of water goes to waste. Treating the wastewater where it is produced on site could be a solution. In some Indian estates, decentralized systems are mandatory in residential and commercial complexes. In Gurugram, a tech hub on the outskirts of Delhi, this approach failed, with 80% of the decentralized systems non-functional. One reason is poor maintenance. The wastewater treatment plant in this residential complex processes 130,000 liters of wastewater. Previously, it was monitored by staff on site, but now monitoring is largely digital. That's done by Delhi-based company Digital Pani. The company uses what's called a plug-and-play model, which integrates machines on-site with modern digital monitoring.
We are not trying to aim for fully automated, 100% digitized assets because the cost and the benefit has to also play out for the customers. So we are always proposing a hybrid sort of operation where you're blending in technology where it's useful.
Rahul Singh, the company's technical expert, explains the benefits of sensor-based monitoring.
The system used to be a kind of black box. You had to go and investigate if something went wrong. Now we have installed monitoring sensors. And when the system is cleaned, we notify the operator. We also check the amount of water. If water is lost, we can find out where.
The company claims that the system now purifies 20% more water than before, that the water quality is better and energy consumption has dropped significantly. The treated water is suitable for flushing toilets and watering gardens. There is no need for locals to buy extra water. Back in Sangam Vihar, the unauthorized settlement where residents have to buy expensive water. There is just 45 liters of water available per person per day here, but with 1 million inhabitants, a vast amount of wastewater is generated. Here too, decentralized water treatment could significantly improve the situation. According to a recent study, only half of the settlement's wastewater should be treated in Delhi's centralized plants.
The other half of Sangam Vihar, which is very dense, its sewerage system and storm water should be connected to decentralized points outside Sangam Vihar in the forest area. And it will be an ideal flow.
The treated wastewater could recharge the small lakes and water reservoirs located around Sangam Vihar.
So recycling of wastewater treatment has immense role to play, considering in a climate-constrained society now where rainfall is more extreme, groundwater recharge is not very high.
According to a recent study, 80% of wastewater in India could be treated and reused, for example, for irrigation in the agricultural sector. This would leave much more clean water for drinking.
From growing water crises to increasingly frequent and devastating floods, human-induced climate change has a lot to answer for. But sometimes the solution to these problems can be found within nature itself. Let's head to Germany to look at a project designed to prevent flash floods using trees. This approach can actually be used by cities across the world to prevent flash floods in the future.
Rivers aren't supposed to look like this. Today, many of them are straight, narrow, depleted and surrounded by concrete. Humans have a long history of changing rivers and their landscapes so they can use them for farming, industry, transportation and to build houses close to their edge. But rivers and floodplains serve an important function. The cities of Leipzig, Markli, Berg and Schkeuditz in Germany are located on a major floodplain, home to one of the largest urban floodplain forests in Central Europe. Many floodplains along Germany's major rivers can no longer store excess water because of dikes that were built to stop water from reaching them, and some of the remaining floodplain areas are covered by fields and houses. In fact, most floodplains in Europe are thought to have deteriorated. But they're vital ecosystems. They absorb and store carbon, helping tackle climate change. Dikes can overflow or break, whereas intact floodplains can keep flash floods in check. And it's possible to revitalize floodplain landscapes. Ecologist Matthias Scholz has been studying the role of rivers and coastal wetlands for decades.
40 years ago, we realized this floodplain forest was undergoing a process of expansion. Many trees developed here that were not flood resistant and which displaced the tree species typical of a floodplain forest.
Elm trees or oaks can handle floods as well as dry periods better than maples, for instance. By absorbing moisture from the soil, they can lower the risk of flash floods. So researchers started purposely flooding a small area of the forest every spring for decades and watched what happened.
We found out that allowed the forest to stay moist for up to 3 months longer, even during drought periods, and that this floodplain forest was able to adapt to these wetter, more dynamic conditions. So species that don't belong here receded, leaving space and light for the tree, animal, and plant species that are typical of the floodplain forest.
The forest was literally trained to handle more water again.
Even with flood-resistant trees, if they don't experience flooding for a long time, they may forget how to cope with it or how to adapt to it.
Data collected over 30 years shows how the ecosystem is returning to its natural state. The researchers were surprised how fast the forest recovered once water levels were adjusted. Rainer Werner is an engineer at the Leipzig Greenery and Water Bodies Department.
At the end of the 1990s, the city of Leipzig began reconnecting old channel systems in the floodplain, like this one here, the Burg Auenbach, to the main watercourses.
The dike was cut in some places to let the water overflow into the floodplain.
We're seeing a clear and measurable rise in groundwater levels, even within a very short space of time. And even with such a small water body, there are visible, measurable results.
And in 2018, the city, NGOs, and local authorities agreed to restore the floodplain over the next 30 years.
As you can see here, we've moved the field relatively far away from the edge of the forest, creating a large corridor in which the water can meander freely.
Christiane Froberg was in charge of revitalizing this old riverbed.
We have several outlets through which, when the flood comes, the rising water can flow. It flows over this very low bank directly into the forest. This means that with the 5.5 kilometres of new waterway, which we've recently finished building, we can flood around 45 hectares of floodplain forest several times a year.
Fish and rare insect species have already settled in. The hard part is finding a balance between flooding the forest enough so it relearns how to store more water and not overflooding it, which would change the entire ecosystem. And different interests have to be considered too.
We're in a big city, so there are many different views on how the forest should be used. And recreational use is particularly important. That means that if we flood certain areas and some paths become inaccessible in spring as a result, we need to explain this and provide information or offer alternatives. Though actually we found that there is a very high level of acceptance and that people often find very creative solutions.
Farmers in the area also needed to be convinced about the flooding plans.
Bringing more water into the landscape doesn't mean giving up agricultural use. You just have to adapt the agricultural practices, like turning once arable land into a wild meadow, and that of course has to be appropriately compensated.
In the next 10 to 15 years, 16 kilometers of former arms of the river could be revitalized. Dried up segments will be reconnected, and at least 30% of the original floodplain area will be underwater again. And instead of this, it will look like this. Of course, projects like this come with a hefty price tag. The city of Leipzig already spent 6.5 million euros to buy back land and build new bridges and gateways for crossing the newly restored river. But it's money well spent. In fact, flooding is the most expensive natural hazard in Europe. Flood damage caused by rivers could rise to 6.8 billion euros by the end of this century. Most large European cities are situated on floodplains. Some are predicted to suffer heavy flood damage in the future. And the changes that are being made to most of our waterways are adding to the risk of flooding, not reducing it. A recently adopted EU nature restoration law aims to restore almost all its damaged ecosystems.
When we consider the monetary damage that extreme events can cause to our society and the long-term effects required to address them, it's clear that putting money into ecosystem restoration is a future-proof investment.
And that's why more European cities situated in floodplains are experimenting with nature-based approaches.
That's all for today's episode. As we saw, change doesn't really happen overnight. It needs patience, persistence, planning, execution, and innovation. Do you know of any such initiative that's driving meaningful change? We'd love to hear about it. You can connect with us on our email address or reach out to me directly on my social media handles. Thank you for joining us. I will see you next week with more such stories. Until then, take care. Goodbye. Namaskar.